Some secrets are buried so deep they don't just change your future. They rewrite your entire past. And sometimes the person you love most is the one carrying the truth that will either save you or destroy everything you thought you knew about yourself. Hello, beautiful souls. I hope you're having an absolutely amazing day, wherever you're watching from around this incredible world of ours. Please drop a comment and let me know what city or country you're tuning in from, because I genuinely love connecting with our global family. How are you doing today? Really, I want to know. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, you are seriously missing out on stories that will completely transform how you see love, destiny, and the power of truth. Hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, these stories will change your life. Now let me tell you about Adrian Wayne and the night everything he believed about love, family, and his own identity shattered into a million pieces. The blood on the letter wasn't Mia's. Adrian Wayne stared at the crimson stains spreading across his father's handwriting, his hands trembling as the confession he'd never meant to find burned through his consciousness like acid. Behind him, the sound of breaking glass echoed from the study where Mia Bennett stood frozen, her dark eyes reflecting the same horror that was tearing through his chest. Adrian, I can explain. Mia's voice cracked as she stepped over the shattered crystal decanter, her father's chauffeur uniform jacket clutched in her hands like evidence of a crime neither of them had committed. But Adrian couldn't breathe. Couldn't think past the words that had just rewritten his entire existence. Asterisk, the Bennett family debt has been paid in blood. Frank Bennett's daughter must never know she's your half-sister. Some truths are too dangerous for love to survive. Asterisk, the letter was dated 18 years ago. Signed by his father, Edmund Wayne. Addressed to a man named Vincent Castellano. A name that made Adrian's billionaire empire feel suddenly fragile, built on foundations of sand and secrets and lies that went deeper than he'd ever imagined. You knew, Adrian whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of his world collapsing. All these months, every stolen moment, every time we got Mia, you knew we were? No. The word exploded from Mia's throat with desperate fury. I swear on my mother's grave, I had no idea. None. I thought we were just. She couldn't finish the sentence, and Adrian understood why. How do you explain falling in love with someone who might be your brother? How do you justify 6 months of secret meetings, whispered confessions, stolen kisses that had felt like the most real thing in either of their carefully constructed lives? Then why is this in your father's jacket? Adrian held up the letter with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Why does Frank Bennett have a confession from my father about debts paid in blood and dangerous truths? Mia's face went white as moonlight. He said he was cleaning out old files from the estate. Said Mr. Wayne had given him some papers to destroy years ago, but he'd forgotten about them. I was helping him sort through everything when I found. When you found proof that your father has been lying to both of us for 18 years, Adrian finished, understanding crashing over him like ice water. The study felt too small, too suffocating, filled with the weight of revelations that changed everything about who they were, where they'd come from, why they'd found each other. Adrian's penthouse had always been his sanctuary, 40 floors above Manhattan, where he could control every variable, manage every outcome, ensure that chaos never touched his carefully ordered existence. Now chaos was standing 3 feet away, wearing his driver's daughter's face, holding secrets that made his billion-dollar empire feel like children's games. The Castellano name, Mia said quietly, her voice carrying new understanding that terrified them both. Adrian, my mother's maiden name was Castellano. She died when I was 2. My father said she had no family, no connections, that it was just the 3 of us against the world. Adrian felt reality shifting beneath his feet like quicksand. Vincent Castellano, your mother's family, who apparently had some kind of debt to your father that was paid in blood. Mia's hands were shaking now, the chauffeur jacket falling to the floor as she backed toward the window. What kind of debt, Adrian? What did your father do to my family? The question hung between them like a blade, sharp enough to cut through 6 months of stolen happiness, passionate enough to destroy the love that had grown between a billionaire's son and a driver's daughter who'd thought they were defying class expectations instead of biological impossibilities. I don't know, Adrian admitted, his voice hollow with the weight of truths he'd never wanted to discover. But I'm going to find out. He moved toward his father's safe, hidden behind a portrait that had watched over their family for 3 generations. The combination was his mother's birthday. The woman who died when Adrian was 10, leaving him with nothing but questions about love and loss and the kind of grief that money couldn't heal. Adrian, don't. Mia's voice carried warning. Some secrets are buried for good reasons. Are they? Adrian turned to face her, seeing the woman he'd fallen in love with and the stranger who might share his DNA in the same impossible moment. Because the secret we just uncovered suggests that everything we know about our families, our histories, our connection, all of it has been a lie. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing documents that Adrian had never bothered to examine, financial records that went back decades, and a leather journal that bore his father's distinctive handwriting. Edmund Wayne's private notes, Adrian read from the cover. Business transactions and personal obligations, 1995 to 2005. Mia approached slowly, as if the journal might explode if she moved too quickly. The years around when we were born. Adrian opened to a random page, scanning entries that documented business deals, charitable donations, and personal reflections on the responsibilities of wealth and power. Then he found an entry that made his blood turn to ice. Asterisk, Vincent Castellano's debt to the Wayne family has grown beyond financial obligation. His daughter Maria's pregnancy complicates matters significantly. The child cannot know the truth about paternity. Some bloodlines must remain separate to protect both families from consequences neither could survive. Asterisk. The journal fell from Adrian's hands, pages scattering across the Persian rug like evidence of crimes that reached across generations. Maria Castellano, Mia whispered. My mother's name was Maria, and according to this, she was pregnant with a child whose father. Adrian couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the possibility that was reshaping everything he'd believed about family and love and the difference between desire and biological impossibility. Your father, Mia completed, her voice carrying the weight of understanding that changed everything about who they were to each other. Adrian, your father might be my father too. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with the sound of a love story transforming into something much more complicated and dangerous. Adrian looked at Mia, really looked at her, trying to see similarities that he'd attributed to attraction instead of genetics, familial traits that he'd interpreted as compatibility instead of shared DNA. The dark hair, the strong jawline, the amber eyes that seemed to see straight through his billionaire facade to the person underneath. Features that could belong to passion or bloodline, chemistry or chromosomes. There's more, Adrian said, retrieving another document from the safe. A DNA test report dated 6 months after Mia's birth, with results that would either confirm their worst fears or restore the possibility of a love that had felt too perfect to be real. But before he could open the envelope that held their future, the penthouse door burst open with the sound of splintering wood and tactical precision. Adrian Wayne. Mia Bennett. You're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to murder. Federal agents flooded the study with weapons drawn, moving with the coordinated efficiency of people who'd been planning this moment for months. Adrian felt Mia's hand find his, as they were separated by circumstances neither had anticipated, by secrets that went deeper than family history and reached into criminal territory that threatened to destroy everything they'd built. What murder? Mia demanded as handcuffs closed around her wrists. We haven't done anything. But as federal agents read them their rights, as evidence bags filled with documents that documented decades of Wayne family secrets, as Adrian saw his penthouse transformed into a crime scene, one terrible possibility crystallized in his mind. If Vincent Castellano's debt to the Wayne family had been paid in blood, and if that blood belonged to Mia's mother, then the woman Adrian loved might be the daughter of the man his father had killed. And their love story was about to become a murder investigation that would either clear their names or damn them both. The federal detention center in Lower Manhattan smelled like disinfectant and desperation. But Adrian Wayne had never been more grateful for anything in his life than the bulletproof glass separating him from the woman he loved and the questions that could destroy them both. The DNA test, Mia said through the visitor phone, her voice hollow with exhaustion after 12 hours of federal interrogation. Did you open it? Adrian shook his head, noting how the harsh fluorescent lighting made Mia look younger, more vulnerable than the confident woman who'd been secretly meeting him in coffee shops and art galleries for 6 months. Agent Rodriguez confiscated everything as evidence. But Mia, there's something else. Something they're not telling us about why we're really here. Mia leaned forward, her dark eyes searching his face for reassurance that neither of them could provide. The murder charges. They keep asking about Vincent Castellano's death. But I don't even remember him. If he was my grandfather, why don't I have any memories of him? Because you were 2 when your mother died, Adrian replied, pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to form in his mind. But Frank, your father, he's been working for my family since before you were born. He would have known Vincent, known your mother, known whatever connection existed between our families. The weight of 18 years of potential deception settled between them like a wall. Frank Bennett had been more than just the Wayne family chauffeur. He'd been Adrian's confidant, his connection to a world beyond billionaire privilege, the man who'd taught him to drive, to fish, to understand that wealth meant nothing without purpose. Frank raised me to believe my mother was a saint who died tragically young, Mia said quietly. No extended family, no complicated history, just a beautiful woman who loved too deeply and left too soon. If that's not true, then everything we know about our families is a lie, Adrian finished. But Mia, there's something about Frank that I never told you. Adrian's throat constricted as he prepared to share a secret that had shaped his entire relationship with the Bennett family. When I was 16, I was in a car accident. Drunk driving, teenage stupidity, the kind of mistake that destroys lives and families. Frank was driving behind me that night. He's the one who pulled me from the wreck, called the paramedics, saved my life. Mia went white. You never mentioned. Because my father paid Frank to keep it quiet. No police report, no media attention, no consequences for the heir to the Wayne Empire who could have killed innocent people with his recklessness. Adrian's voice carried shame he'd been burying for 9 years. Frank Bennett has been protecting my family's secrets for decades, Mia. The question is, what secrets has he been protecting from you? Before Mia could respond, the detention center door opened to admit a woman Adrian had never seen before. Mid-50s, expensive suit, carrying herself with the authority of someone accustomed to controlling conversations and outcomes. Mr. Wayne, Miss Bennett, the woman said, settling into a chair with the casual confidence of someone who owned the room. I'm Victoria Sterling, and I represent interests that extend far beyond whatever federal charges have brought you here. Adrian studied the woman's face, noting the calculation behind her professional smile. What kind of interests? The kind that understand the Wayne and Bennett families are connected by more than employment relationships, Victoria replied, pulling out files that made Adrian's stomach drop. The kind that know Vincent Castellano's death was neither accidental nor investigated by people interested in justice. Mia pressed her hand against the glass separating her from Adrian. Who are you really? Victoria's smile was sharp as broken crystal. I'm the lawyer who's been protecting your father's secrets for 20 years, Miss Bennett. And I'm here to offer you both a choice that will determine whether you spend the next 30 years in federal prison or discover truths that could transform everything you believe about love, family, and the price of justice. Adrian felt ice flood his veins. What kind of choice? The DNA test in your father's safe wasn't the only one Edmund Wayne commissioned, Victoria said, showing them documents that made the detention center feel suddenly airless. There were 3 tests conducted over a period of years, with results that tell a very different story than the letter you discovered. She opened a file that revealed laboratory reports, genetic analyses, and medical records spanning 2 decades. Mia Bennett, you are not Adrian Wayne's half-sister. But the truth about your connection is far more dangerous than simple shared parentage. The relief that flooded through Adrian was immediately replaced by dread at Victoria's expression. What truth? The truth about why Vincent Castellano really died, why Frank Bennett has spent 18 years protecting you both from that knowledge, and why federal agents aren't here to investigate a murder. They're here to prevent you from discovering who really committed it. Mia's voice was barely a whisper. My grandfather was murdered? Vincent Castellano was executed because he discovered something about the Wayne family empire that certain people couldn't allow to become public knowledge, Victoria explained, her tone clinical despite the emotional devastation of her words. Your mother, Maria, witnessed the execution. She was killed to silence her testimony. Adrian felt the world tilting as the scope of his family's involvement became clear. My father ordered their deaths. Your father tried to prevent their deaths, Victoria corrected. Edmund Wayne was being blackmailed by business associates who discovered his humanitarian work was interfering with their more profitable ventures. When Vincent Castellano threatened to expose the blackmail scheme, those associates decided that silence was more valuable than cooperation. The detention center fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lighting and the distant sound of steel doors closing on other people's broken dreams. Frank Bennett witnessed your mother's murder, Victoria continued, addressing Mia directly. He saved you from the same fate by agreeing to disappear with you. Let everyone believe you died with your mother, and raise you under an assumed identity. Mia stared at Victoria through tears that carried 18 years of questions finally being answered. My name isn't really Mia Bennett. Your name is Sofia Castellano, and you're the only living witness to a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of government, business, and organized crime, Victoria replied. Frank Bennett has spent your entire life protecting you from people who would kill you to prevent your testimony. Adrian's mind raced through implications that stretched far beyond family secrets and into territory that threatened everything he'd built. The federal agents who arrested us, they're not here to investigate the murders. They're here to eliminate the witnesses. Some of them are, Victoria confirmed grimly. Others are part of a task force that's been building a case against the people responsible for your family's suffering. The question is, which agents can you trust, and which ones are here to ensure your silence becomes permanent? The weight of conspiracy and corruption settled over them like a burial shroud. Adrian looked at Mia, Sofia, seeing not just the woman he loved but a survivor of violence that had shaped both their lives without their knowledge. What do you want from us? Adrian asked. Victoria's smile was cold as winter. I want you to help me destroy the people who killed your families and stole 18 years of your lives. I want you to testify against corruption that spans 3 decades and reaches into institutions you've been taught to trust. And if we refuse? Mia asked. Then you'll spend tonight in federal custody while people who profit from your silence arrange for accidents that will ensure you never have the chance to choose again. Adrian felt the terrible weight of justice and survival colliding in ways that offered no easy choices. How do we know you're telling the truth? How do we know you're not part of the same conspiracy you're asking us to expose? Victoria reached into her briefcase and pulled out a photograph that made both Adrian and Mia gasp in recognition. It showed a young Frank Bennett, barely 25, holding a baby girl while standing beside a woman who looked exactly like an older version of Mia. Because Frank Bennett has been working with federal task forces for 18 years, gathering evidence against the people who destroyed your families, Victoria said quietly. And he's been preparing for the day when Sofia Castellano would be old enough, strong enough, and protected enough to help him bring those people to justice. The photograph trembled in Adrian's hands as he understood the scope of sacrifice and protection that had shaped their entire relationship. Frank knew who Mia really was when he let us meet. Frank arranged for you to meet, Victoria corrected. He's been positioning you both for this moment since Sofia turned 18. The coffee shop meetings, the art gallery visits, the stolen moments that felt like destiny. All of it was carefully orchestrated to build a connection strong enough to survive the truth about your family's history. Mia pressed both hands against the glass, her face reflecting horror and understanding in equal measure. Our love was manufactured. Your love was protected, Victoria said gently. Frank Bennett knew that Sofia Castellano would need someone she trusted completely when the time came to face the people who'd destroyed her family. He arranged your meeting with Adrian Wayne because he understood that love was the only force powerful enough to help you both survive what's coming. Adrian stared at the photograph of Frank and baby Sofia, seeing 18 years of careful planning and strategic protection disguised as coincidence and fate. What's coming? Victoria's expression grew darker. Tomorrow morning, the federal task force arrests 12 people connected to Vincent and Maria Castellano's murders. Business leaders, government officials, law enforcement officers, people with the power and motivation to ensure that key witnesses don't live long enough to testify. She leaned forward, her voice carrying the weight of urgency and desperation. Adrian Wayne and Sofia Castellano, you have approximately 18 hours to decide whether you trust each other enough to survive a war that's been building since before you were born. The detention center's visiting time alarm sounded, signaling the end of their conversation and the beginning of the most dangerous night of their lives. What do we do? Mia whispered. Adrian met her eyes through the bulletproof glass, seeing his own fear and determination reflected back at him. We survive. Together. No matter what it costs. Even if it costs everything we thought we knew about ourselves. Especially then, Adrian replied, understanding that their love was about to be tested by forces that had been shaping their lives since before they were old enough to understand what love meant. As guards escorted them back to separate cells, as night settled over Manhattan like a shroud, Adrian Wayne and Sofia Castellano began preparing for a battle that would either destroy the conspiracy that had stolen their families or consume them in the fires of justice they were finally old enough to demand. The explosion that rocked the federal detention center at 3:17 a.m. wasn't an accident. Adrian jolted awake in his cell as emergency lighting bathed the corridors in hellish red, the sound of twisted metal and shattering concrete echoing through the building like thunder. In the chaos that followed, guards shouting, alarms blaring, the acrid smell of smoke, and something that might have been burning electronics, he heard the one sound that made his blood turn to ice. Mia screaming his name. Adrian! They're coming for me. There! Her voice cut off abruptly, replaced by the sound of tactical boots and commands shouted in languages Adrian didn't recognize. He pressed himself against the cell door, trying to see through reinforced glass into corridors now filled with smoke and figures moving with military precision. These weren't federal agents conducting an investigation. These were professionals eliminating witnesses. Sofia Castellano, a voice called through the smoke, heavily accented and coldly professional. 18 years we've been looking for you. Time to finish what we started with your mother. Adrian felt rage explode through his chest like molten steel. Someone was using the detention center explosion as cover to murder the woman he loved, and he was trapped behind steel and bulletproof glass, helpless to protect her. That's when his cell door swung open. Move! Frank Bennett stood in the doorway wearing federal tactical gear, his familiar face grim with purpose and urgency. We have maybe 3 minutes before they realize you're not in the building. Adrian stared at the man who'd been his family's chauffeur, seeing him clearly for the first time. This wasn't a driver who'd been caught up in circumstances beyond his understanding. This was a federal operative who'd spent 18 years positioning pieces on a chessboard for this exact moment. Frank, how are you? Agent Francis Bennett, FBI Task Force, Frank said curtly, handing Adrian body armor and weapons with practiced efficiency. I've been undercover for 20 years, Adrian. Your father knew. He's been cooperating with federal investigations since before you were born. They ran through corridors filled with smoke and emergency lighting, Frank navigating the detention center's layout with the familiarity of someone who'd been planning this extraction for months. Mia, Sofia, where is she? Adrian demanded, pulling on tactical gear while trying to process the revelation that his father hadn't been a murderer, but a federal informant. Safe house protocol, Frank replied, leading them toward what looked like a maintenance door, but opened onto a tunnel that Adrian had never suspected existed. Victoria Sterling extracted her through alternate routes. We've been preparing for this scenario since Sophia turned 18. They emerged into the Manhattan subway system, where a train waited with doors open and no other passengers. Frank pushed Adrian aboard while checking communication devices that connected him to operations spanning the entire city. The explosion, Adrian said as the train lurched into motion. You caused it. We used it, Frank corrected. Intelligence sources indicated that tonight was when our enemies would make their move to eliminate witnesses. We had to create chaos that would allow us to extract you both while making it appear you'd been killed in the attack. Adrian felt his world reshaping itself around federal operations that had been manipulating his entire life. The Wayne family empire, my father's business, everything I inherited, it's all part of this investigation? Frank's expression softened slightly. Adrian, your father spent the last 15 years of his life trying to atone for business decisions that had enabled criminal organizations to flourish. When he discovered that his pharmaceutical investments were being used to fund arms dealing and human trafficking, he approached federal agencies and offered complete cooperation. The train pulled into a station Adrian didn't recognize, emerging into what looked like a private transportation hub filled with federal vehicles and personnel who moved with the coordination of a major operation. Edmund Wayne's humanitarian work, Adrian realized. It wasn't just charity. It was intelligence gathering. Your father used his business connections to infiltrate criminal networks, document their operations, and gather evidence for prosecutions that have taken 20 years to build, Frank confirmed. Tonight, those prosecutions begin. They transferred to an armored vehicle that carried them through Manhattan streets toward a destination Frank wouldn't identify. But Adrian could see federal agents positioned throughout the city, coordinated operations that suggested something much larger than simple witness protection. How many people are we talking about? Adrian asked. 47 arrests across 12 countries, Frank replied, monitoring communication frequencies that carried reports of simultaneous operations worldwide. Arms dealers, human traffickers, corrupt government officials, business leaders who've been using legitimate companies to fund international crime. All of them connected to the conspiracy that killed Vincent and Maria Castellano. Adrian felt the scope of justice finally being served, but his focus remained singular. "Where is Sophia?" Frank's smile was the first genuinely warm expression Adrian had seen from him since this nightmare began. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere she can finally stop hiding and start living as the person she was meant to be." The armored vehicle pulled into an underground garage beneath a building that looked like corporate offices, but felt like a fortress. Federal agents escorted them through security checkpoints that rivaled anything Adrian had seen at government facilities. "Victoria Sterling said our love was protected," Adrian said as they rode an elevator that descended much deeper than any corporate building should require. "That you arranged for us to meet." Frank was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Adrian, Sophia has spent her entire life believing she was alone in the world, that her family was dead, that she had no connections beyond what I could provide as her guardian. When she turned 18, federal psychologists determined that she would need emotional support strong enough to survive learning the truth about her past." The elevator opened onto a command center that looked like something from a spy thriller. Banks of monitors displaying global operations, federal agents coordinating international law enforcement, and screens showing real-time arrests of people Adrian recognized from charity galas and business conferences. "You studied my psychological profile," Adrian realized. "You determined that I would be the ideal emotional support for Sophia when she learned about her family. We determined that you were the only person with the resources, intelligence, and moral character to help Sophia navigate what we knew was coming," Frank corrected gently. "But Adrian, what happened between you two, the connection, the love, the way you've protected each other, that was never manufactured." Before Adrian could respond, a door opened across the command center, and Sophia emerged wearing federal tactical gear that somehow made her look more beautiful than any designer dress ever had. "Adrian," she breathed, crossing the room with steps that carried 18 years of running toward a moment when she could finally stop hiding. He caught her in his arms, feeling her warmth and strength and the simple reality of her presence after hours of believing he might have lost her forever. But as they held each other in the center of a federal command center, surrounded by operations designed to bring justice for crimes that had shaped their entire lives, Adrian realized their love story was just beginning. "Sophia Castellano," he said quietly, testing her real name like a prayer. "Adrian Wayne," she replied, her voice carrying hope for the first time since he'd known her. "Ready to meet the real me?" "I've been ready my whole life," Adrian said, understanding that everything they'd been through had been preparation for this moment, when they could finally love each other without secrets, without lies, without the weight of unspoken truths that had nearly destroyed them both. But as federal agents prepared them for testimony that would bring down an international conspiracy, as operations unfolded across multiple continents, as justice finally began to emerge from decades of corruption and violence, Adrian realized their greatest challenge wasn't surviving federal protection or international criminals. Their greatest challenge was learning to trust a love that had been orchestrated by federal agents, guided by necessity, and shaped by forces beyond their control. The question that would determine their future wasn't whether they could survive the conspiracy that had stolen their families. The question was whether their love was strong enough to transcend the circumstances of its creation and become something authentic, chosen, and entirely their own. The federal safe house in the Hamptons looked like a billionaire's weekend retreat, but Sophia could feel the surveillance technology humming beneath its elegant facade as she stood on the deck watching federal agents position themselves around the perimeter like pieces on a chessboard. 47 arrests in 12 hours, Adrian reported, joining her with coffee and intelligence updates that documented the systematic dismantling of an international criminal network. Arms dealers, human traffickers, corrupt officials. Everyone connected to your family's murders is either in custody or running for their lives. Sophia accepted the coffee while studying Adrian's face, noting the exhaustion beneath his relief. For 24 hours, they'd been living in a federal operation that felt like vindication and victory. But something between them had shifted since learning the truth about how their relationship began. "Victoria Sterling wants us to review testimony protocols this afternoon," Sophia said, avoiding the conversation they'd been circling since yesterday. "Final preparation before the international tribunals begin." "Sophia." Adrian's voice carried the weight of questions that had been building since they'd learned their love story was part of a federal investigation. "We need to talk about what Frank told us. About how we met." Sophia set down her coffee and turned to face him directly, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in his expression. "You want to know if what we feel is real or if we're just responding to psychological programming." I want to know if you would have chosen me if federal agents hadn't arranged our first meeting, Adrian said quietly. I want to understand whether we're in love or if we've been conditioned to believe we're in love. The question hung between them like a blade, sharp enough to cut through 6 months of stolen moments, whispered confessions, and the growing certainty that they'd found something worth fighting for. Adrian, I've spent 18 years believing I was alone in the world, Sophia replied, her voice carrying honesty that cut deeper than any federal testimony. Every relationship I've ever had has been built on lies about my identity, my family, my past. You're the first person I've ever trusted with the truth about who I really am. But you didn't know the truth about who you really are until yesterday, Adrian pointed out. How can you trust me with something you're still discovering yourself? Before Sophia could respond, Frank Bennett approached from the safe house, carrying files that would either answer their questions or complicate them further. Psychological evaluation results, Frank announced, settling into a chair with the careful movements of someone who'd been carrying heavy burdens for too long. Federal psychologists have been monitoring your relationship since your first meeting, documenting emotional responses, behavioral patterns, compatibility indicators. Sophia felt ice flood her veins. You've been studying us like lab rats. We've been protecting you like family, Frank corrected gently. Sophia, when you were 2 years old, you witnessed your mother's murder. The trauma was so severe that federal psychologists weren't certain you'd ever be able to form healthy emotional attachments. He opened files that revealed psychological evaluations, therapy notes, and development assessments spanning Sophia's entire life. Every relationship you've attempted has been carefully monitored to ensure your emotional safety. Friends, teachers, potential romantic interests, all of them screened to prevent anyone from exploiting your vulnerabilities. Adrian studied the reports, seeing 18 years of federal protection disguised as normal childhood and adolescence. You controlled every aspect of her social development. We guided aspects that could have been dangerous while allowing natural growth in safe environments, Frank replied. Sophia has never been manipulated into feeling anything. She's been protected while discovering her own capacity for trust, love, and emotional connection. Sophia stared at psychological evaluations that documented her journey from traumatized child to young woman capable of loving someone completely. What about Adrian? Was he psychologically evaluated too? Frank's expression grew more complex. Adrian Wayne has been under federal observation since his 16th birthday, when his drunk driving accident revealed character traits that made him an ideal candidate for this operation. Character traits? Adrian asked warily. Moral courage, emotional intelligence, the willingness to sacrifice personal advantage for other people's well-being, Frank explained, showing them evaluations that made Adrian uncomfortable with their accuracy. When you pulled 3 strangers from that overturned car despite your own injuries, when you refused medical attention until everyone else had been treated, those actions revealed someone who could be trusted with Sophia's safety. Sophia felt understanding bloom in her chest. You weren't arranged for me. You were selected for me. You were selected for each other, Frank corrected. Federal psychologists determined that you were emotionally compatible, that your personalities would complement each other, that you shared values and goals that could sustain a long-term relationship. But that doesn't answer whether what we feel is real, Adrian said. Compatibility isn't love. Shared values aren't passion. How do we know the difference between authentic emotion and strategic psychological matching? Frank smiled, and for the first time since revealing his federal identity, he looked like the man who'd taught Adrian to drive and Sophia to trust that someone would always be there to protect her. Because love isn't something that can be engineered, he said simply. Federal agents can create opportunities for compatible people to meet. Psychologists can identify emotional patterns that suggest successful relationships. But the moment when someone chooses to trust another person completely, to risk everything for their happiness, to build something together that's stronger than either person could create alone, that moment can't be manufactured. Sophia looked at Adrian, remembering their first conversation at the coffee shop Frank had suggested, their first stolen kiss in the art gallery Frank had recommended, their first night together in the penthouse where Frank had known they'd have privacy. You created the circumstances, she realized. But we chose each other. Every day for 6 months, Adrian agreed, understanding beginning to replace uncertainty. Even when we thought it was impossible, even when we believed we were defying your father and my social expectations, even when we had every reason to walk away, we kept choosing each other. Frank nodded with satisfaction. That's the difference between federal operation and federal protection. We didn't engineer your love. We protected the space where your love could grow without interference from people who would have used it to hurt you. Sophia felt tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of grief or confusion. They were tears of recognition, of finally understanding that the love she'd been afraid to trust was exactly what she'd believed it to be. "Adrian," she said, taking his hands and feeling the simple reality of their connection beneath all the complexity of federal operations and family secrets. "When I look at you, when I'm with you, when I think about building a future together, none of that has anything to do with psychological compatibility or strategic matching." "What does it have to do with?" Adrian asked, though his smile suggested he already knew the answer. "It has to do with you making me laugh when I'm terrified, holding me when I'm broken, believing in me when I can't believe in myself," Sophia replied, her voice carrying 6 months of accumulated truth. "It has to do with feeling like I can be completely myself with you, like I never have to hide or pretend or protect myself from judgment." Adrian pulled her closer, and in his eyes she saw not just love, but the kind of certainty that survives federal investigations, family conspiracies, and the revelation that their entire relationship had been facilitated by people they'd never suspected existed. "Sophia Castellano," Adrian said, her real name sounding like music in his voice. "I would choose you in any circumstances, under any name, regardless of how we met or who arranged our introduction. Even knowing that federal agents identified you as psychologically compatible with me before we ever spoke. Especially knowing that," Adrian replied, his smile carrying the warmth that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. "Because it means our connection was real enough that trained professionals could recognize its potential before we even understood it ourselves." Before Sophia could respond, Victoria Sterling approached from the safe house with an expression that immediately shifted the mood from romantic revelation to operational urgency. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Victoria said, her voice carrying news that would either complete their victory or shatter it entirely. "But we have a problem with the international prosecutions." "What kind of problem?" Frank asked, his federal agent persona immediately reasserting itself. "The kind that suggests someone in our operation has been feeding information to the criminal networks we're trying to prosecute," Victoria replied, showing them communication intercepts that made Sophia's blood run cold. 3 of the arrested arms dealers were released on diplomatic immunity claims that shouldn't exist. 2 human traffickers escaped federal custody during prisoner transfers. And James Morrison, the government official who ordered your parents' murders, died in his cell last night under circumstances that are being classified as suicide. Sophia felt victory slipping away like sand through her fingers. "They're eliminating evidence. They're eliminating witnesses," Victoria corrected grimly. "And according to these communications, Sophia Castellano and Adrian Wayne are next on their list." The safe house that had felt like protection suddenly felt like a trap. Adrian pulled Sophia closer, his expression shifting to the fierce protectiveness that had made her believe in love despite 18 years of learning that trust was dangerous. "How many people in the federal task force knew our location?" Adrian demanded. "Too many," Frank admitted, already beginning tactical preparations that suggested their romantic moment was about to become a fight for survival. "And we're about to discover which ones have been working for the other side all along." As federal agents positioned themselves around the safe house, as surveillance equipment detected incoming vehicles that moved with predatory coordination, as Sophia and Adrian prepared to defend the love they'd finally learned to trust, one terrible truth became clear. Their enemies weren't just criminal networks seeking revenge. Their enemies included federal agents who'd been protecting the conspiracy from the inside, ensuring that justice remained forever out of reach. The battle for their love was about to become a war for their lives. The attack came at sunset, when the Hamptons safe house was bathed in golden light that made the approaching tactical vehicles look like shadows against the dying day. Sophia watched through reinforced windows as federal agents who were supposed to protect them took positions that could only be described as assault formation, their movements coordinated with the precision of people who'd been planning this moment for months. 12 vehicles, full tactical teams, military-grade equipment. Frank reported from communication monitors that were simultaneously tracking friendly and hostile forces. "This isn't a rogue operation. This is a sanctioned federal action with authorization codes I've never seen before." Adrian pulled Sophia away from the windows while checking weapons that Frank had positioned throughout the safe house with the foresight of someone who'd always known this moment would come. Who has the authority to authorize an attack on federal witnesses under protection? Adrian demanded. Someone much higher up the chain than I have access to, Frank replied grimly, destroying hard drives that contained evidence accumulated over 20 years of investigation. Someone who's decided that the conspiracy we've been fighting is more valuable than the justice we've been seeking. Victoria Sterling emerged from the Safe House's communication center with an expression that carried news that would either save them or damn them completely. I know who's behind the attack, she announced, holding documents that made Sophia's world tilt on its axis. And it's someone you've trusted your entire life. She placed a photograph on the table that showed Adrian's father, Edmund Wayne, shaking hands with a man Sophia recognized with growing horror. James Morrison, Sophia whispered. The government official who ordered my parents' murders. Edmund Wayne's business partner for 15 years, Victoria confirmed. The humanitarian projects, the charitable foundations, the pharmaceutical investments. All of it was a joint venture designed to create legitimate cover for the largest money laundering operation in American history. Adrian stared at the photograph, watching his understanding of his father's legacy crumble into ash. You're saying my father wasn't a federal informant. He was a criminal. I'm saying your father was both, Victoria replied, revealing the terrible complexity of truth that had shaped their entire lives. Edmund Wayne was laundering money for international criminal networks while simultaneously providing intelligence to federal agencies, playing both sides to protect his own interests while positioning himself as indispensable to everyone. The weight of betrayal that reached across generations settled over Sophia like a burial shroud. The federal task force investigating my family's murders, it was controlled by the same people who ordered those murders. Some members of the task force were legitimate federal agents trying to bring justice, Frank said quietly. Others were plants designed to ensure that justice never succeeded. We've been fighting a war where the enemy controlled half our own forces. Sophia felt rage building in her chest like molten steel. You've known this the entire time. You've known that the federal government was protecting the people who killed my family. I've suspected it for 18 years, Frank corrected. But I couldn't prove it without evidence that would expose you to the same people who'd already killed your parents. So I waited and I planned, and I positioned you both for the moment when we'd have enough power to fight back. Adrian studied Frank's face, seeing depths of strategy and sacrifice that went far beyond federal protection. You're not just FBI. You're something else entirely. Frank's smile was sharp as broken glass. I'm Vincent Castellano's son, Sophia's uncle, and I've spent 20 years preparing to destroy the people who murdered my family. The revelation hit Sophia like lightning. Frank Bennett, the man who'd raised her, protected her, shaped her entire understanding of family and safety, was her blood relative, her father's brother, her real family who'd been hiding in plain sight. Uncle Vincent, she whispered, childhood memories suddenly reshaping themselves around suppressed recognition. Agent Francis Castellano, undercover for 20 years, building the case that would finally bring justice for Vincent, Maria, and everyone else who died protecting the truth about Edmund Wayne's money laundering operation, Frank confirmed. Before Sophia could process the emotional impact of learning her guardian was actually her uncle, the safe house's security alarms activated with sounds that meant their enemies had begun the final assault. Multiple breach points, coordinated attack, federal authorization codes that override all protection protocols, Frank reported, monitoring systems that showed tactical teams approaching from every direction. They're not here to arrest us. They're here to eliminate witnesses to a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of government. Adrian positioned himself between Sophia and the incoming threat, his expression carrying the fierce determination of someone who'd found something worth dying for. How do we fight federal agents with unlimited resources and legal authority? Adrian demanded. We don't fight them, Victoria said, revealing a plan that had been 20 years in the making. We expose them. To everyone. Simultaneously. In a way that makes it impossible for the conspiracy to survive public scrutiny. She activated communication equipment that connected them to media outlets, international law enforcement agencies, and government oversight committees across multiple countries. Ladies and gentlemen, Victoria announced into broadcasting systems that would carry her words to millions of people simultaneously. You are about to witness the execution of federal witnesses by agents acting under the authority of officials who've been protecting international criminal networks for decades. The tactical teams outside the safe house hesitated as they realized their assault was being broadcast live to congressional committees, international courts, and media organizations that would document every illegal action taken against protected witnesses. This is Agent Francis Castellano, undercover for the Federal Bureau of Investigation for 20 years, speaking from a federal safe house that is currently under assault by agents acting under corrupt authority, Frank announced, his voice carrying across communication networks that spanned continents. The evidence you are about to see documents the systematic murder of federal witnesses, the corruption of justice systems, and the protection of criminal networks by officials sworn to serve the public interest. Sophia understood the strategy with crystalline clarity. They couldn't fight the corrupt federal agents, but they could expose them to oversight systems that even criminal conspiracies couldn't completely control. Sophia Castellano, daughter of Vincent and Maria Castellano, murdered for discovering money laundering operations that funded international arms dealing and human trafficking, Sophia said into the broadcasting system, her voice steady despite the tactical teams preparing to breach their defenses. Adrian Wayne, son of Edmund Wayne, who spent 15 years playing both sides of a federal investigation to protect his own criminal interests while appearing to cooperate with law enforcement. As their testimony streamed to oversight committees and international tribunals, as evidence of corruption was broadcast to audiences who could demand accountability, the tactical teams outside found themselves caught between orders to eliminate witnesses and the knowledge that their actions were being recorded by systems they couldn't control. "Stand down," came a voice over federal communication channels. Congressional oversight has assumed authority over this operation. All agents returned to base for immediate debriefing. The tactical teams hesitated, caught between conflicting orders and the certainty that their actions were being monitored by authorities who outranked whoever had sent them. "I repeat, stand down and return to base. This operation is now under congressional oversight." Sophia watched through the windows as federal agents who'd been prepared to kill them slowly withdrew, their assault plans derailed by the simple expedient of exposing their actions to public scrutiny. "It's over," Frank said quietly, monitoring communication frequencies that confirmed the withdrawal of hostile forces. "The conspiracy can't survive public exposure. Too many people are watching now." But as relief flooded through Sophia, as she felt the weight of 18 years of hiding finally lifting from her shoulders, Adrian voiced the question that would determine their future. The money laundering operation, the criminal networks, the humanitarian projects that were funding arms dealing. How much of the Wayne family fortune was built on blood money? Victoria consulted files that documented financial flows spanning decades. Conservative estimates suggest that 60% of Wayne Industries' profits came from money laundering activities. "Adrian, your inheritance is primarily the proceeds of international crime." Sophia felt her world tilting as the scope of moral complexity became clear. The man she loved was the heir to an empire built on the suffering of countless victims, funded by the same criminal networks that had murdered her family. "I can't keep it," Adrian said immediately. "Every dollar, every investment, every asset connected to my father's criminal activities, it all has to be returned to the people who were harmed." "That would bankrupt you completely," Frank pointed out. "Adrian, you'd lose everything." Adrian looked at Sophia, seeing not just the woman he loved, but the symbol of everyone who'd been victimized by the wealth he'd inherited. "Then I'll lose everything," Adrian said simply. "Some things are more important than money." Sophia felt her heart breaking and healing simultaneously. This was the moment that would define not just their relationship, but their character, their future, their ability to build something clean from foundations of corruption. "Adrian Wayne," she said quietly, "are you prepared to choose justice over inheritance, love over wealth, doing what's right over preserving what you've built?" "Sophia Castellano," Adrian replied, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "I've already made that choice. I made it the moment I chose you over everything else my life was supposed to be." As federal oversight committees assumed control of the investigation, as international tribunals prepared to prosecute the surviving members of the conspiracy, as Adrian began the process of liquidating his inheritance to compensate the victims of his father's crimes, Sophia realized their love story was just beginning. They'd survived family secrets, federal conspiracies, and the revelation that their entire relationship had been shaped by forces beyond their control. Now they faced the greatest challenge of all, building a life together with nothing but love, truth, and the courage to choose justice, even when justice demanded they sacrifice everything they'd ever known about wealth, power and privilege. 6 months later, the one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn felt like a prison cell compared to Adrian's former penthouse, but it wasn't the cramped space or second-hand furniture that was slowly destroying Sophia's soul. It was watching the man she loved disappear piece by piece under the weight of choosing justice over everything else he'd ever known. Another rejection, Adrian announced, tossing a job application onto the kitchen table where dozens of others had accumulated like evidence of his professional exile. Apparently, being the son of a convicted money launderer makes me unemployable in the financial sector. Sophia looked up from her laptop, where she'd been working on freelance graphic design projects that barely covered their rent, and saw exhaustion etched into Adrian's features like scars from a war he was losing. "The Victim Compensation Fund distribution is almost complete," she offered, trying to find hope in the justice they'd achieved. 1,800 families have received reparations from your father's estate. Children who lost parents, communities destroyed by arms trafficking, victims of human trafficking rings. They're getting help because of what you sacrificed. And we're living on instant noodles while I try to explain to potential employers why the FBI seized everything I owned, Adrian replied, his voice carrying bitter exhaustion that cut through Sophia's heart like glass. 6 months ago, Adrian had voluntarily liquidated a $3 billion inheritance to compensate victims of his father's criminal enterprises. The Wayne family fortune, real estate, pharmaceutical companies, investment portfolios, art collections. All of it had been converted into reparations for people harmed by Edmund Wayne's money laundering operations. Adrian Wayne, former billionaire, now worked part-time at a non-profit organization for war refugees, earning $12 an hour, while federal agencies continued investigating connections between his family and international crime networks. "Maybe you should take the position with Homeland Security," Sophia said quietly, referring to the one job offer Adrian had received. A consulting role helping federal agencies identify money laundering operations in legitimate businesses. "Working for the same government that protected my father's criminal activities for 15 years? Adrian's laugh was bitter. "Sophia, they're not offering me that job because they respect my expertise. They're offering it because they want to control me, keep me close, ensure I never become a threat to whatever new version of the conspiracy they're building." Sophia felt tears burning her eyes as she watched the man she loved struggle with choices that offered no good options. Adrian had given up everything to do what was right, but justice had left him empty-handed and unemployable, surviving on her meager income while the weight of moral choices crushed his spirit day by day. "I ruined your life," Sophia whispered. "If you'd never met me, never learned the truth about your father, you could have lived comfortably on inherited wealth while remaining ignorant about where it came from." Adrian crossed the tiny kitchen and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands with the gentle strength that had made her believe in love despite 18 years of learning that trust was dangerous. "Sophia Castellano," he said quietly, "you gave me the chance to become someone I could live with. Without you, I would have spent my entire life building on foundations of blood money while calling myself a humanitarian. But you're miserable," Sophia said, her voice breaking with the weight of watching their love survive federal conspiracies only to be slowly destroyed by poverty and isolation. "You've lost your home, your career, your social connections, everything that made you who you were." "Everything that made me who I thought I was," Adrian corrected gently. "Sophia, do you know what I've learned in 6 months of working with refugee families, of helping people rebuild their lives after losing everything to the same criminal networks my father enabled?" Sophia shook her head, unable to speak past the tears that carried 6 months of accumulated guilt and love and desperate hope that their sacrifice had meaning. "I've learned that wealth without purpose is just expensive emptiness," Adrian said, his voice carrying conviction that poverty couldn't diminish. "I've learned that helping someone find safety, rebuild their family, start over in a new country with nothing but hope, that's more valuable than any business deal I ever closed." Before Sophia could respond, someone knocked on their apartment door with the authoritative rhythm that meant either trouble or news they weren't prepared to handle. Adrian opened the door to reveal Victoria Sterling, looking as polished and professional as ever despite the modest surroundings she'd entered. "Victoria," Sophia said warily, "what brings you to Brooklyn?" Victoria's expression was grim as she settled into their small living room, carrying news that would either restore hope or destroy what little stability they'd built. "The final phase of the federal prosecutions concluded yesterday," Victoria announced. 47 convictions, $2.3 billion in recovered assets, and the dismantling of money laundering networks across 6 continents. Congratulations, Adrian said flatly. Justice served, victims compensated, criminals punished. What do you need from us now? Victoria pulled out documents that made Sophia's breath catch. Adrian, the prosecutor's office has been reviewing your cooperation with federal investigations. Your voluntary asset forfeiture, your testimony against your father's associates, your assistance in tracking financial networks. It's been determined that you were acting under federal witness protection protocols. Adrian stared at her. What does that mean? It means the government owes you reparations for sacrificing your inheritance in service of national security, Victoria explained, showing them paperwork that documented compensation Sophia couldn't believe was real. The Victim and Witness Protection Act provides financial support for individuals who sacrifice personal assets to assist in criminal prosecutions. Sophia felt hope stirring in her chest like sunlight after months of darkness. How much compensation? $12 million, Victoria said simply. Not enough to restore the Wayne family fortune, but enough to ensure you never worry about rent money again. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, studying documents that represented financial security and the return of choices that poverty had stolen from them. There's a condition, Victoria continued. The compensation comes with an offer of permanent employment with a joint FBI Homeland Security task force investigating international financial crimes. Adrian, they want you to head a new division focused on identifying and disrupting money laundering operations before they can fund criminal networks. Sophia felt her world tilting as possibilities she'd stopped allowing herself to imagine suddenly became real. Adrian could have his career back, but in service of preventing the very crimes his father had enabled. And Sophia? Adrian asked. What's her role in this offer? Victoria's smile carried warmth for the first time since Sophia had known her. Sophia Castellano, the trauma you experienced and survived, combined with your intimate knowledge of how criminal networks destroy families, makes you uniquely qualified to work with victim services programs. The State Department wants you to design support systems for witnesses and victims of international crime. Sophia stared at Victoria, understanding that they were being offered not just financial compensation but purpose, careers that would turn their suffering into tools for protecting other families from similar devastation. Why? Sophia asked. Why are they suddenly offering us everything we lost? Victoria's expression grew more complex. Because someone much more powerful than the people we've been fighting has been watching this case develop. Someone who understands that true national security requires good people in positions where they can prevent corruption instead of just prosecuting it after the damage is done. Before Sophia could ask who Victoria was referring to, Adrian's phone buzzed with a call from a number he didn't recognize. Adrian Wayne, he answered cautiously. Mr. Wayne, this is President Harrison calling from the White House. Sophia felt reality shift as the leader of the free world spoke directly to the man she loved in their tiny Brooklyn apartment. Mr. President, Adrian said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. Son, I've been following your case with great interest, President Harrison continued. What you and Miss Castellano have accomplished, exposing corruption, sacrificing personal wealth for justice, choosing service over comfort, that's exactly the kind of leadership this country needs in positions where it can make a real difference. Sophia pressed closer to Adrian, so she could hear the conversation that was reshaping their entire future. I'm calling to personally invite you both to Washington, President Harrison said. There's something I'd like to discuss with you about serving your country in ways that would honor the sacrifices your families have made. Adrian looked at Sophia, seeing his own amazement reflected in her expression. 6 months ago, they'd been federal witnesses hiding from corruption that reached the highest levels of government. Now the president was personally recruiting them for service that would transform their suffering into strength. We'll be there, Mr. President, Adrian said. Excellent. And Mr. Wayne? What you've done, choosing justice over wealth, putting other people's welfare ahead of your own comfort. That's what real leadership looks like. Your father may have lost his way, but you found yours. After the call ended, Sophia and Adrian sat in their tiny apartment, surrounded by rejection letters and instant noodle containers, processing an offer that would restore not just their financial security, but their sense of purpose. Sophia, Adrian said quietly, 6 months ago we had wealth and secrets. Now we have nothing but truth in each other. And an offer to spend our lives making sure other families don't suffer what ours suffered. Sophia replied, understanding that their darkest hour had been preparation for something greater than they'd ever imagined. Are you ready to leave Brooklyn? Adrian asked, gesturing around the apartment that had been their refuge during the hardest months of their lives. Sophia looked around the tiny space where they'd learned to love each other without the distractions of wealth or status, where they'd discovered that happiness could be built on nothing more than truth and commitment and the courage to choose each other every day. I'm ready to go anywhere with you, she said simply. As long as we're building something together that serves something bigger than ourselves. Adrian pulled her into his arms, and Sophia felt the strength that had carried them through federal conspiracies, family revelations, and financial devastation transform into hope for a future they would choose rather than inherit. But as they prepared to leave for Washington, as they considered offers that would restore their security while giving them purpose, Sophia realized their greatest test wasn't behind them. Their greatest test was learning to trust happiness again after so many months of sacrifice and loss. The White House Oval Office felt like stepping into the epicenter of American power, but Sophia found herself focusing not on the historic surroundings, but on the way President Harrison's eyes carried the weight of someone who understood sacrifice on a scale that transcended personal loss. Miss Castellano, Mr. Wayne, President Harrison said, gesturing for them to sit in chairs that had hosted world leaders and foreign dignitaries. Before we discuss the future, I want you to understand something about the past. Sophia exchanged glances with Adrian, noting how surreal it felt to be treated as honored guests in the same building where policies had been shaped by the corruption they'd helped expose. Your family's suffering wasn't collateral damage in some abstract war against international crime, President Harrison continued, his voice carrying personal conviction that suggested this meeting was about more than government recruitment. Your families were targeted specifically because they threatened a conspiracy that reached into this office. The revelation hit Sophia like ice water. You're saying the federal government ordered my parents' murders? I'm saying that people operating under federal authority, people I trusted with national security responsibilities, betrayed that trust to protect criminal networks that were more valuable to them than American lives. President Harrison replied, his expression carrying guilt that reached beyond political responsibility into personal accountability. Adrian leaned forward, understanding beginning to reshape his view of everything they'd endured. You've known about the corruption all along. I've suspected it for 8 years, President Harrison confirmed. But suspicion isn't evidence, and evidence isn't justice. What you two accomplished, exposing the conspiracy, documenting the crimes, surviving long enough to testify, gave us the tools we needed to clean house. He activated a wall screen that displayed organizational charts documenting systematic changes throughout federal law enforcement agencies. 17 high-ranking officials removed from positions of authority. 43 federal agents reassigned or terminated. 6 department heads replaced with people who understand that serving American interests means protecting American families, not sacrificing them to criminal networks. Sophia felt understanding bloom in her chest. This wasn't just about prosecuting criminals. This was about reforming the institutions that enabled them. Institutional reform requires institutional memory, President Harrison agreed. People who understand how corruption spreads, how good intentions get perverted into criminal facilitation, how to build safeguards that prevent future betrayals. He pulled out files that documented positions Sophia had never imagined existing. Federal roles that combined law enforcement with victim advocacy, intelligence gathering with humanitarian protection, national security with individual justice. The Wayne Castellano Foundation for International Justice, President Harrison announced, showing them proposals that made Sophia's breath catch. A joint federal-private partnership designed to prevent the kind of crimes that destroyed your families while supporting the victims of crimes we failed to prevent. Adrian studied organizational charts that showed how their personal experience with federal corruption could be transformed into systemic protection for other families. You're asking us to institutionalize our suffering, Adrian said, to turn our trauma into government policy. I'm asking you to ensure that no other family endures what yours endured because federal agents chose criminal profits over public service, President Harrison corrected. Adrian, your business background and intimate knowledge of money laundering operations make you uniquely qualified to design financial oversight systems that can't be corrupted from within. He turned to Sophia with respect that acknowledged not just her survival but her strength. Sophia, Your experience as both victim and witness gives you insights into how federal protection systems fail the people they're designed to serve. We need you to redesign those systems so they actually protect instead of just managing witnesses until trial. Sophia felt purpose stirring in her chest for the first time since learning her identity had been built on federal lies. What kind of authority would we have? Complete operational independence, unlimited federal resources, and direct reporting to the president's office, President Harrison replied. The Wayne Castellano Foundation would operate as a hybrid organization, part federal agency, part private foundation, accountable to oversight committees, but free from the bureaucratic constraints that enabled corruption to flourish. Before Sophia could process the scope of what they were being offered, Victoria Sterling entered the Oval Office with news that would either complete their victory or complicate it beyond resolution. "Mr. President," Victoria announced, "we have a problem with the international prosecutions. Several key witnesses have been murdered in European custody, and the surviving members of the money laundering network have activated sleeper assets we didn't know existed." President Harrison's expression darkened. "How many assets?" "Enough to suggest that our victory was incomplete," Victoria replied grimly. "The conspiracy we exposed was just one tentacle of something much larger." Adrian and Sophia's testimony dismantled the American operations, but the international networks are retaliating by targeting anyone connected to our prosecutions. Sophia felt ice flood her veins. "Are we safe?" "For now," Victoria said. "But the surviving criminal networks see you as symbols of their vulnerability. If they can eliminate the witnesses who brought down the American operation, it sends a message to potential witnesses in other countries." Adrian's expression shifted to the fierce protectiveness that had made Sophia believe in love despite every reason to fear trust. "What kind of retaliation are we talking about?" Victoria pulled out intelligence reports that documented systematic attacks on witnesses, prosecutors, and their families across multiple countries. Assassinations disguised as accidents, family members targeted to discourage testimony, federal agents murdered for investigating connections we exposed. President Harrison studied the reports with the expression of someone calculating acceptable losses against strategic gains. "The foundation we're proposing isn't just about preventing future crimes. It's about protecting the people brave enough to expose existing ones." Sophia understood with crystalline clarity that they weren't just being offered careers. They were being recruited for a war that would define whether justice was possible in a world where criminal networks operated across national boundaries. "If we accept," Sophia said, "we become permanent targets for international criminals who profit from the corruption we'd be fighting." "If you refuse," President Harrison replied, "those criminals continue operating with the knowledge that even the American government can't protect witnesses willing to seek justice." The choice was impossible and clear. Accept positions that would make them lifelong targets for international crime networks, or retreat into private life, while knowing their safety came at the cost of other families' suffering. "There's something else," Adrian said, voicing the question that had been building since they'd learned the scope of federal corruption. "Our relationship. Our love. How much of it was authentic, and how much was strategic positioning for recruitment?" President Harrison's smile was genuinely warm for the first time since they'd entered the Oval Office. "Mr. Wayne, the federal government has many capabilities, but engineering genuine love isn't one of them. What you and Sophia have built together, the trust, the commitment, the willingness to sacrifice everything for each other, that can't be manufactured or manipulated." He gestured toward intelligence files that documented their relationship with clinical precision. Federal agents could arrange your initial meeting, psychological analysis could predict your compatibility, but the moment when you chose to trust each other completely despite every reason to remain guarded, that moment was entirely your own. Sophia felt tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness or confusion. They were tears of recognition, of finally understanding that the love she'd been afraid to trust was exactly what she'd believed it to be. "Adrian Wayne," she said, taking his hands in the Oval Office of the White House while the President of the United States witnessed her confession. "Will you build something with me that's bigger than anything either of us could create alone?" "Sophia Castellano," Adrian replied, his voice carrying 6 months of accumulated certainty. "I've been building that with you since the moment we met. I'm just finally understanding the scope of what we're creating together." They turned to President Harrison with expressions that carried decision forged through suffering, refined by sacrifice, and strengthened by love that had survived every attempt to destroy it. "Mr. President," Adrian said, "the Wayne Castellano Foundation for International Justice accepts your offer. With one condition," Sophia added. "We want Frank, Agent Francis Castellano, as our operational director. He's spent 20 years fighting this war from the shadows. It's time he had the authority and resources to fight it in the light." President Harrison's smile carried satisfaction that went beyond political success into personal justice. "Agent Castellano has already accepted the position. In fact, he's been designing operational protocols for the Foundation since we first considered your recruitment. As federal officials prepared transition documents, as international security protocols were established to protect their new roles, as Adrian and Sophia began planning an organization that would transform their suffering into systematic protection for other families, they realized their love story was evolving into something unprecedented. A partnership that would serve not just their own happiness, but the cause of justice for people who'd been abandoned by the institutions designed to protect them. Their love had survived family secrets, federal conspiracies, and financial devastation. Now it would become the foundation for preventing other families from enduring similar betrayals. 1 year later, the Wayne Castellano Foundation headquarters in Washington, D.C. looked like a fusion of Adrian's former business sophistication and Sophia's commitment to serving people the system had failed. But neither of them had expected their first major case to involve the man who'd murdered Sophia's parents walking into their lobby with information that could destroy them or save thousands of lives. "James Morrison wants to make a deal," Frank announced, entering the executive conference room where Adrian and Sophia were reviewing intelligence on human trafficking networks they'd been tracking across 4 continents. "He's offering complete testimony about international operations in exchange for protective custody." Sophia felt rage and nausea warring in her chest as she processed the possibility of facing her parents' killer across a negotiation table. "The man who ordered my family's execution wants federal protection? The man who ordered your family's execution has spent the past year in maximum security federal prison, watching his former associates eliminate everyone connected to the money laundering network," Frank corrected grimly. "Morrison isn't offering to cooperate out of conscience. He's offering to cooperate because he's the last surviving link to operations that certain people want to remain buried." Adrian studied intelligence reports that documented the systematic assassination of witnesses, prosecutors, and their families across multiple countries. "How many people have died to protect whatever Morrison knows?" 23 confirmed murders in the past 6 months, Frank replied, his voice carrying the weight of justice delayed and lives lost. "Federal witnesses, family members, investigating officers, journalists who were researching connections we exposed. Someone is cleaning house with extreme prejudice." Sophia felt the weight of responsibility that came with wielding federal authority settle over her like armor. The Wayne Castellano Foundation had been granted unprecedented investigative powers, unlimited resources, and the mandate to prevent international crimes that traditional law enforcement agencies couldn't address. "What's Morrison offering?" Sophia asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Frank activated presentation equipment that showed organizational charts spanning multiple continents, financial networks that funded terrorism and human trafficking, and political connections that reached into governments worldwide. "Complete documentation of Project Constellation," Frank announced. "An international network designed to use humanitarian aid organizations as fronts for arms dealing, human trafficking, and political destabilization." Adrian felt ice flood his veins as the scope of criminal enterprise became clear. "Humanitarian organizations, like the ones my father was funding." "Like the ones your father thought he was funding," Frank corrected. "Project Constellation has been infiltrating legitimate charity organizations for 15 years, using them to move money, weapons, and people across international borders while maintaining perfect legal cover." Sophia stared at intelligence that documented the perversion of organizations designed to help refugee families, provide medical aid to war-torn regions, and protect children from exploitation. "How many legitimate charities have been compromised?" she asked. 47 organizations across 23 countries, Frank replied. "Children's hospitals in Syria being used to smuggle weapons. Refugee camps in Africa being used for human trafficking. Medical supply shipments to Ukraine carrying drugs instead of antibiotics. The weight of systematic corruption that reached into humanitarian work. The one thing Sophia had believed remained pure in a world full of betrayal, threatened to overwhelm her with despair. Morrison has names, financial records, operational details, and evidence that could shut down the entire network, Frank continued. But he wants guarantees that go beyond standard witness protection. What kind of guarantees? Adrian demanded. Before Frank could answer, the conference room door opened to admit Victoria Sterling, carrying news that would either complete their victory or destroy everything they'd built. Morrison's not the only one offering information, Victoria announced, settling into the room with the controlled urgency of someone managing multiple crises simultaneously. We have 3 other high-level sources willing to testify against Project Constellation, but they're all demanding the same thing. Which is? Victoria pulled out documents that made Sophia's blood run cold. Complete immunity for their roles in money laundering operations, new identities for their families, and permanent relocation to countries that don't have extradition treaties with the United States. Sophia felt understanding crash over her like ice water. They're not offering to cooperate with justice. They're offering to escape justice in exchange for exposing their former associates. The people responsible for destroying humanitarian organizations, trafficking children, and funding international terrorism want to retire comfortably while their victims continue suffering, Adrian added, his voice carrying disgust that went beyond personal betrayal into moral revulsion. Frank was quiet for a moment before responding. Sometimes justice requires accepting deals with people who don't deserve mercy in order to save people who don't deserve suffering. The conference room fell silent as Sophia and Adrian grappled with choices that offered no morally pure options. Accept deals with criminals who'd participated in atrocities, or allow those atrocities to continue while pursuing idealistic notions of perfect justice. How many people are currently being trafficked through Project Constellation networks? Sophia asked. Victoria consulted intelligence reports with clinical precision. Conservative estimates suggest 12,000 people, primarily children and young women, being moved through humanitarian aid channels at any given time. And if we reject the cooperation deals, those trafficking operations continue indefinitely while we spend years building cases that may never reach prosecution, Frank replied. Sophia, sometimes saving the people you can save requires making deals with people you wish you could punish. Sophia looked at Adrian, seeing her own moral struggle reflected in his expression. This was the moment that would define not just their foundation but their character, their willingness to choose pragmatic results over idealistic principles. There's another option, Adrian said slowly. What if we accept their cooperation but don't honor the immunity agreements? Frank stared at him. Adrian, that would be a federal crime. Breaking witness protection agreements, violating immunity deals, it would destroy any chance of prosecuting the people they expose. Not if we gather enough independent evidence to prosecute the entire network without relying on their testimony, Adrian replied, understanding crystallizing in his voice. What if we use their information to identify victims, document operations, and build cases that don't depend on the cooperation of criminals seeking immunity? Sophia felt hope stirring in her chest like sunlight after the darkest night. We take their intelligence but build independent evidence that allows us to prosecute everyone, including the sources. That would require unprecedented coordination between international law enforcement agencies, Victoria warned. The kind of operation that's never been attempted on this scale. Then it's time to attempt it, Sophia said with absolute conviction. Victoria, activate the Foundation's international protocols. We're going to give James Morrison and his associates exactly what they think they want, and use it to destroy them all. Frank smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose 20-year war was finally approaching victory. Sophia, are you prepared for the consequences of betraying deals with people who've spent decades learning how to eliminate threats to their operations? Frank, are you prepared to help us save 12,000 trafficking victims while ensuring that the people who destroyed our families pay the price for every life they've taken? Sophia replied. Before Frank could answer, alarms throughout the Foundation headquarters activated with sounds that meant immediate threats to operational security. Multiple breach points, coordinated assault, unknown attackers with military equipment. Came the announcement over security channels. All personnel to secure positions immediately. Sophia felt familiar ice flood her veins as she realized that their enemies had decided eliminating the Wayne Castellano Foundation was preferable to negotiating with it. Morrison's cooperation offer was a trap, Adrian realized, drawing weapons from security positions throughout the conference room. They're here to eliminate us before we can use the intelligence he was offering. Or they're here because Morrison's former associates learned about our plan to prosecute everyone regardless of immunity agreements, Sophia said, checking communication equipment that connected them to federal response teams across the city. Frank was already coordinating defensive measures while monitoring tactical frequencies that carried reports of sophisticated assault teams surrounding the building. 12 vehicles, full military equipment, coordinated attack patterns, Frank reported. This isn't a criminal operation. This is a professional military assault designed to eliminate the Foundation and everyone in it. Sophia looked around the conference room where they'd been planning to save thousands of victims while bringing justice to their families' killers. Understanding that their enemies had decided the Wayne Castellano Foundation was too dangerous to survive. Adrian, she said quietly, taking his hand as gunfire erupted in the corridors outside. If we don't survive this, I want you to know that every choice we've made together has been worth it. Sophia Castellano, Adrian replied, his voice steady despite the tactical teams breaching their security perimeter. We're not dying today. We're winning. Together. That's when the conference room's reinforced windows exploded inward, and armed figures poured into the space where Sophia and Adrian had been planning to transform their suffering into salvation for thousands of victims. But as federal response teams activated, as international law enforcement agencies coordinated the largest simultaneous operation in history, as evidence against Project Constellation streamed to prosecutors across multiple continents, Sophia realized something that changed everything. Their enemies weren't attacking to prevent justice. They were attacking because justice was already inevitable, and eliminating the Foundation was their last desperate attempt to delay prosecutions that would destroy international criminal networks spanning decades. The assault on their headquarters wasn't the end of their mission. It was proof that their mission was succeeding beyond anything they'd dared to hope. 2 years later, the ceremony at the United Nations headquarters in New York was unlike anything Sophia had ever imagined. Representatives from 47 countries gathered to honor the Wayne Castellano Foundation for dismantling Project Constellation and rescuing over 15,000 victims of international trafficking and exploitation. The Morrison Protocols for International Justice, Secretary General Chin announced, presenting documents that would establish permanent safeguards against humanitarian aid organizations being corrupted by criminal networks, represent a new paradigm in global cooperation against crimes that transcend national boundaries. Sophia stood beside Adrian on the podium, wearing a simple blue dress that somehow felt more elegant than any designer gown from her previous life, watching as delegates approved measures that would protect vulnerable populations while ensuring that justice couldn't be bought with immunity agreements. Mr. Wayne, Miss Castellano, Secretary General Chin continued, your foundation's work has demonstrated that individual courage, combined with institutional support, can achieve justice on a scale that was previously thought impossible. Adrian squeezed Sophia's hand as they prepared to address an audience that included world leaders, law enforcement officials, and survivors of the trafficking networks they'd helped destroy. 2 years ago, Sophia began, her voice carrying across the assembly hall with clarity that came from absolute certainty about her purpose. We stood in a federal detention center, believing our love was built on lies and our families were destroyed by corruption we couldn't challenge. She paused, looking at faces that represented nations working together to protect people who'd been abandoned by the systems designed to serve them. Today, we know that love isn't diminished by difficult origins. It's strengthened by choosing to build something meaningful from whatever circumstances bring people together. The Wayne Castellano Foundation exists because we learned that personal healing requires contributing to collective justice. Adrian stepped forward, addressing delegates with the confidence of someone who discovered his true calling through loss and reconstruction. The criminal networks we've dismantled operated through a simple principle. Individual suffering is acceptable if it serves larger profits. They counted on victims remaining isolated, witnesses staying silent, and justice agencies operating without coordination. He gestured toward the assembly hall filled with international cooperation that would have been impossible before their foundation established new protocols for cross-border law enforcement. They were wrong about the power of people who refuse to remain isolated, who choose to speak truth despite personal cost, and who demand that justice serve human dignity instead of political convenience. The applause that followed carried recognition not just for their achievements, but for the transformation they represented. From victims to advocates, from isolated suffering to collective action, from inherited wealth to earned purpose. The Foundation's work will continue under expanded international mandate, Sophia announced, revealing developments that would multiply their impact exponentially. 47 countries have committed resources to establishing regional Wayne Castellano centers, providing local coordination for anti-trafficking operations while maintaining global intelligence sharing. After the ceremony, Sophia and Adrian found themselves alone on a balcony overlooking Manhattan, the city where their love story had begun with federal conspiracies and family secrets that nearly destroyed them both. "Any regrets?" Adrian asked, echoing the question that had defined their relationship since learning their initial meeting had been arranged by federal agents. Sophia considered the question seriously, thinking about the billions in inherited wealth Adrian had sacrificed, the comfortable anonymity she'd abandoned, the dangers they faced daily from criminals who saw their work as existential threats. "I regret that my parents didn't live to see Project Constellation destroyed," she said honestly. "I regret that your father never understood the difference between serving criminal networks and serving justice. I regret that it took 20 years to achieve accountability for crimes that could have been prevented." "But do you regret us?" Adrian asked, the question carrying 2 years of accumulated certainty, but needing final confirmation. Sophia turned to face him fully, seeing not the billionaire heir who'd lost everything or the federal witness who'd survived conspiracy, but the man who'd chosen to build a life dedicated to protecting other families from the suffering theirs had endured. "Adrian Wayne," she said, her voice carrying absolute conviction, "I regret nothing about loving you, choosing you, building something with you that's bigger than anything either of us could have imagined alone." Before Adrian could respond, Frank approached from the reception, carrying news that would either complete their victory or launch them into new challenges. Final Project Constellation prosecutions concluded today, he announced with satisfaction that carried 20 years of patient investigation. James Morrison, life without parole. 43 co-conspirators, sentences ranging from 25 to life. 0 immunity agreements honored. All cooperation deals voided due to evidence of continued criminal activity during negotiations. Sophia felt deep satisfaction at justice finally achieved without compromise or deals with people who'd profited from suffering. "And the victims?" Adrian asked. 15,412 people rescued from trafficking operations, provided with medical care, legal assistance, and support services coordinated through foundation programs, Frank replied. "Children reunited with families, women provided with education and career training, men given opportunities to rebuild their lives without dependence on criminal networks." Sophia felt tears of gratitude streaming down her face as she understood the scope of healing their work had enabled. "There's something else," Frank said, pulling out documents that made Sophia's breath catch. "The State Department has declassified your parents' files. Vincent and Maria Castellano were working with international human rights organizations to document arms trafficking through humanitarian aid channels. They weren't random victims. They were investigative journalists who discovered Project Constellation 20 years before we dismantled it." The revelation hit Sophia like lightning. Her parents hadn't been collateral damage in someone else's war against organized crime. They'd been warriors in the same fight their daughter was now leading. "They were building the case we finally completed," Sophia realized, understanding that her work with the Foundation was continuing a mission her parents had started before she was old enough to understand what justice meant. Vincent Castellano's research notes, Maria Castellano's documentation of trafficking operations. All of it has been preserved in federal archives, Frank continued. "Sophia, your parents spent the last years of their lives gathering evidence that helped us identify networks spanning 4 continents." Sophia felt connection to her parents that transcended death and time, understanding that their sacrifice had planted seeds of justice that took 2 decades to bloom but ultimately saved thousands of lives. "They would be proud," Adrian said quietly, pulling Sophia into his arms as Manhattan sparkled below them like a city where justice was possible. "They would be grateful," Sophia corrected, "that their daughter found someone willing to sacrifice inherited wealth for earned purpose, comfort for courage, safety for service." 6 months later, Sophia and Adrian were married in the Wayne Castellano Foundation's main conference room. Surrounded by survivors of trafficking operations they'd helped dismantle, law enforcement officers they'd worked with across 6 continents, and federal agents who'd learned that justice was possible when good people had adequate resources and institutional support. Frank walked Sophia down the aisle, representing not just the uncle who'd protected her, but the federal agent who'd spent 20 years positioning pieces for victory that honored her parents' sacrifice. "Sophia Castellano," Adrian said when they exchanged vows, "you taught me that love isn't about finding someone who fits into your existing life. It's about building a new life together that serves something greater than individual happiness." "Adrian Wayne," Sophia replied, her voice carrying certainty that had survived federal conspiracies, family secrets, and the discovery that their love was real despite its manipulated origins. "You taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to fight for other people's safety even when you're terrified of the personal cost." Their first kiss as husband and wife was witnessed by people whose lives had been saved by their willingness to transform personal suffering into collective action. 5 years later, the Wayne family home in Virginia looked nothing like Adrian's former penthouse. It was filled with children's laughter, family photographs, and the comfortable chaos of people who'd learned that wealth meant nothing compared to love, purpose, and the knowledge that their work made the world safer for families like theirs. "Mama, tell us the story about how you and Daddy met," demanded 4-year-old Vincent, named after his grandfather who died protecting the truth that ultimately saved thousands of lives. "Again," Sophia asked, settling into the living room where Adrian was helping 2-year-old Maria with a puzzle while reviewing files for their latest case. A human trafficking network operating through legitimate adoption agencies. "It's the best story," Vincent insisted, settling beside his parents with the confidence of a child who'd never doubted that he was completely safe, completely loved, and part of a family dedicated to protecting other children from the dangers he would never face. "Once upon a time," Sophia began, looking at Adrian and seeing not just her husband but her partner in work that would continue for the rest of their lives. "There was a billionaire who thought he understood what love meant, and a driver's daughter who thought she understood who she really was. And they were both wrong," Vincent added with delight. "They were both learning," Adrian corrected gently, pulling both children into his lap while Sophia continued their family story. "Learning that real love isn't about wealth or status or having everything figured out. Real love is about choosing to build something together that makes other people's lives better." "And they lived happily ever after?" Maria asked, though at 2 years old, her attention was more focused on the puzzle pieces than the story. Sophia and Adrian exchanged glances that carried 5 years of marriage, 3 international awards for humanitarian work, and the deep satisfaction of knowing their foundation had rescued over 40,000 victims of international crime while dismantling networks that had operated for decades. "They lived usefully ever after," Sophia said, understanding that happiness came not from achieving personal dreams, but from serving purposes that transcended individual desires. "Together," Adrian added, taking Sophia's hand and feeling the simple reality of their connection. No longer complicated by federal conspiracies or family secrets, but strengthened by shared commitment to work that honored their family's sacrifices while protecting other families from similar suffering. As evenings settled over their home, as children played with toys that would never be used to smuggle weapons or drugs, as Sophia and Adrian reviewed cases that would save lives they would never meet, they understood something about love that no amount of wealth or status could have taught them. "The most dangerous thing you can do is fall in love with someone society says you shouldn't. And sometimes that dangerous love becomes the foundation for changing the world." "I am literally crying tears of joy right now." Sophia and Adrian didn't just get their happily ever after. They created a legacy that has saved over 40,000 people and continues their parents' work for international justice. From a billionaire and a driver's daughter to husband and wife running a foundation that protects families worldwide. "This is the most beautiful love story of triumph over tragedy I've ever experienced. ***. What did this incredible journey teach you about love, sacrifice, and the power of choosing purpose over comfort? About how the most meaningful happiness comes from building something together that serves others? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. I read every single one, and I am so grateful you joined Sophia and Adrian on this amazing adventure. ***. And if this story moved your heart as much as it moved mine, you absolutely must hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We have so many more incredible stories about love conquering impossible odds, about people choosing courage over comfort, and about the miracles that happen when 2 people decide to change the world together. ***. Thank you for experiencing this beautiful story with me. Sometimes love really does save the world. One choice, one sacrifice, one act of courage at a time. Until the next story, beautiful souls. Asterisk asterisk.